Oliveira. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Luisa Oliveira, the president of the BSLA. And in my day job, I'm the director of public space and urban forestry in Somerville. And I have also been sitting in on DEI meetings. We have a great committee. I encourage you all to get involved. We have so many good committees that are doing a lot of stuff. So it's really, we really have a community here, which was very different than it has been in the past. And I always credit all that, of course, to Gretchen, but I welcome you to take part in that. So we in the BSLA will often send surveys or ask people about what are some of the barriers or the supports you get in the profession. And really, we ask this to know how to better support our membership. And one thing that we consistently hear is mentorship, and really a longing for mentorship. People, especially younger professionals, wish that they had someone who could guide them and mentor them. And it's something that's the ASLA does have a national mentorship program, but I think it's really important for us to be thinking about that as a chapter. When I think about my own path, I didn't really have many mentors, especially in landscape architecture. I feel like once you finish your studies, you're kind of out there, and maybe there are jobs, maybe there are not. And I really needed mentors, especially in landscape architecture. I only learned about landscape architecture in my mid-20s after coming back from being a volunteer in Namibia. And I really didn't have, it sounded like a really great profession, but I really didn't have a lot of examples of people practicing. And really, why would I? My parents emigrated to the US from a very, very northern part of Portugal. I know that every American has now been to Portugal in the last 10 years. Trust me that you have not been to this place. They lived in a tiny village and were subsistence farmers, and they came here in their 30s with 2 small children. Portugal was under a dictatorship then. They didn't speak English. They didn't go to college, and they certainly didn't know what the path was to go to do those things here in the United States. Because they were farmers, they kind of understood plants and soils, but not landscape architecture. I mean, what is landscape architecture? And honestly, to be honest, I don't think that they really understand what it is now. And I'm sure there are many others of you who have the same experience with your family. But growing up in Western Massachusetts, the people who lived in my town were also working construction and in factories, as my parents were. And the people that I came in contact with were contractors, teachers, maybe someone who works at the post office, nurses. So design was not a thing that the working class had. And I would say that design is still not a thing of the working class. And people know what an architect is, but landscape architecture is even more vague for kids that are growing up in a working class area. Having a mentor, someone who had some kind of map, I think would have been so helpful. I would have been less afraid. I would have been less unsure of myself because I would have had someone to go to. And maybe I wouldn't have questioned if this was the right profession for me so often. It's not that I don't sometimes still question it, but, there was a lot of just not knowing, and I didn't really have anyone I can ask. So mentorship really, for it to work, kind of requires 2 things. One is that there is commitment, that people have to be willing to create a relationship. And then also that there's some kind of chemistry. It's hard to be a mentor or a mentee with someone that you have absolutely nothing in common with. And that, I think, is why do have some feelings about the national ASLA one. If you can't get to know that person so that you feel comfortable with them and comfortable to let them know what barriers you have, it's very hard to have a mentor. And it's hard to have a mentor in work, especially, these lines can sometimes get blurred, or the friendships or what you need from them. I think tonight's conversation is really a starting point for talking about a mentorship program in the BSLA. We're really just asking everyone to listen and to try to understand, kind of take yourself out of your own experience, or see what connections you have with your experience and the speakers. If you grew up with parents who made $100,000, you don't know what it's like to have a family that makes $30,000 in the same town. So we're asking you to kind of stretch your empathy and try to understand that. Same if you grew up getting the benefit of the doubt because you are the predominant skin color. We're asking you to go outside of that and hear what others are saying, or gender. Someone's experience here might resonate with you, and it might inspire you to be a mentee or a mentor. And so we're just asking you to acknowledge that we don't all start at the same place, and to try to understand the journeys we all took, because these journeys are very important, especially if we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And our speakers are about to be very vulnerable with us in letting us know what their journey was. And I really do thank them for being courageous and coming to the front of the class and kind of telling their story. So I do want to acknowledge that it does take some opening up, because sometimes we don't always want to tell everyone what our background is or what obstacles we faced. And oftentimes we're not in an environment where we feel comfortable to do that. So I really laud all of you for stepping up to do that. Thank you. So the format of today's conversation is everybody was given some prompt questions and encouraged to give a little bit of their story in whatever way they want. So they don't have to specifically follow this, but the questions that we asked, just so you also know, are what are the boundaries and obstacles that you encountered as you were getting into your career as a landscape architect or designer, and how did you overcome them? What would you tell your younger self? What would have made it easier for you? And then just a little bit of reflection on the professions, like on the profession in general, how things have changed for you or you've seen in the profession. So we're going to have each of the presenters tell their story, and then 20 minutes of moderated discussion, and then hopefully some question and answer or some larger discussion. So just to be mindful of the time, I want to introduce the first speaker, and that is Kymberly Ware. Kymberly works at Agency Landscape and Planning. And and that's it. Sorry, Kymberly, my middle-aged eyes were getting all confused. Take it away, Kymberly.
No worries. I also have middle-aged eyes, even though I'm 27. Hi, everyone. I am Kymberly. I'm a landscape designer agency, Landscape and Planning, as Lisa just said. And I just have a few kind of chaotic slides to take you guys through, maybe reflective of my journey to and through landscape architecture. But yeah, thanks for bearing with me. So this will be my journey. Okay, so just like setting the scene for what the sort of timeline has been for me. So the last 3 milestones of where I've been are maybe a little bit expected, kind of making my way through the design professions and kind of figuring out the sweet spot of where I want to be, which I think I've ended up at with agency as a landscape designer / planner, kind of bridging the gap, bridging both of those disciplines. But I started out wanting to be an orthodontist and still consider going back to dental school from time to time, but it was a complete departure from what I expected I would be doing to go into the design field. So happy to be here, but I'll kind of walk through kind of how I ended up where I am today. Starting with a little old me and a little bit of a snapshot of the people and places that kind of made me who I am today. So there's my family in the upper left there, and myself kind of matching the vibe that I still try to embody today. And some of the places that kind of were the sublime landscapes that I knew of growing up, my childhood backyard, the interstate going through the West Virginia mountains. My family every summer would drive 10 hours from Columbus, Ohio, where I'm from, down to Savannah, Georgia for vacations every year. So it made me a very resilient driver, driving through those mountains for long periods of time. And it was always kind of the most enchanting part of the year for me. And yeah, some of the farm landscapes around my family's home, which is in kind of rural suburban Columbus, Ohio, which is where I'm calling in from today. So yeah, even though I grew up wanting to go into dentistry, I think landscape was always around me and part of my experience and part of some of my most beloved memories. But it wasn't until I went to school at Ohio State University, at the Knowlton School for my undergrad in landscape architecture, that I really understood what designed landscapes were, and that a lot of these spaces are designed. And I think I was just very enchanted with the idea that that's something that that we could have agency over, and that I could potentially help provide for other people, providing those special moments for other people. So I started out wanting to be an orthodontist. I got kind of wrapped up in landscape, and I've been here ever since. And I went directly to grad school, which was kind of at the encouragement of my mentor from undergrad, Dorte and Ware, who is the director of the Knowlton School at Ohio State. She was like, the mentor role on the hero's journey. She was very much that person for me, like encouraging me to always ask for what I want and kind of go after what I want. I don't think that if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have even applied to the GSD or ended up going. But she very much was the support that I needed at that time, as a student who really didn't know what she wanted to do or how to advocate for herself. So I owe everything to Dorte, I feel like. But yeah, so then I went to the GSD in 2019, and shortly thereafter, we know that there was a pandemic. And so most of my experience at the GSD was virtual, but I think even within that, one of the most precious moments within those 2 years that I was in grad school was actually my internship at agency. And it was kind of this was kind of a turning point for me, because it was the first time that I had really understood what urban planning was, or engaged with planning scale of work, and engaging with communities that we designed for. And it just felt very special and very refreshing to actually speak to and hear from and hear the stories of people in the communities that we work for, and think about how those stories can translate to the built environment. So was my favorite part of that experience as an intern, and also still my favorite part of the job today. But it just made me very enchanted with this intersection between sort of planning scale systems and actually site implementation and built work. And so I really was interested in staying at that intersection of those two disciplines. And so this is it's kind of a joke, but I'm kind of a hybrid agent at agency, working both as a landscape designer and planning work. And so we've been trying to figure out what that title actually is. And so keeping within the thematic agency framework, I called myself a double agent, which is a bit of a suspicious name. So TBD what it will actually be, but the sentiment is there that I work between both of those disciplines today professionally. So, but I think a lot of my interest in sort of history and built work at different scales, ecology and agriculture, is very firmly rooted in my background in landscape. And so it's just been kind of fascinating to think about how that translates to the planning scale, and how to make that legible for communities who are not as familiar with some of these concepts. And so yeah, I'm very comfortable in the in-between between those two disciplines. And so this has been my life. I think, you know, had the opportunity to travel across the country to different communities and work with different types of people on their neighborhoods, on their homes, and thinking about how their stories and what they need kind of translate to the built environment. And I've also, for the past couple of years, had the privilege of working in person and living in Boston with the agency crew, very much near and dear to my heart, and miss them dearly. But I've moved back home to Columbus for the time being, and it's been kind of a grounding experience to return home. There was a conference, the Black and Design conference, a couple weeks ago at the GSD. The theme was around home, so it felt great to go back to Boston and kind of come there from the perspective of someone who has recently come back home and been thinking about some of those elements of home that I bring with me into my work, and kind of re-engaging with some of those original landscapes and original, you know, things that inspired me to go into this field. And being around people who look like me, kind of one of the only opportunities that I had the chance to do that. So very grounding. But I would say reflecting, some of the reflections and lessons so far. The first is something that I kind of gleaned from the Black and Design conference, is that you know, not being afraid to bring your story with you or bring your experiences with you into design. I think sometimes within the design pedagogy, it can be like, you know, a version of design that doesn't necessarily always represent you as a person of color. A lot of the people who were the original leaders of landscape architecture don't look like me. And so when I was first learning about design, I feel like I left my own experiences at the door and kind of looked at that school of thought as what design is and kind of the right answers. But I've now come to discover that my experiences as a Black woman and as someone who comes from a different background are still valuable and make me a more empathetic and stronger designer. So bringing that into your practice is really important, I feel like. Two, something that I got from Dorte is asking for what you want. I felt like, you know, it's often hard to find a mentor, but sometimes, you know, you can find help in the most unexpected places. And a lot of times people are there to help, even if, you know, it's not always a formal mentor-mentee relationship. So I think asking for what you want and advocating for yourself, the worst that people can do is say no. And I think it's been something that I've been trying to continue to move forward with in life. Another thing that I've been learning how to balance is prioritizing life outside of practice, kind of to the same point as lesson number one, about bringing your experiences with you. You know, sometimes it's hard, you know, when you get busy with projects and you're kind of entrenched in work, it's hard to prioritize your life outside of the practice, but I think it is important to do so whenever you can, because those experiences outside of work are, again, what makes you a stronger designer. And so I've, again, still been trying to learn the best way to balance that myself. So I'm trying to practice what I preach a little bit more now. But yeah, those are some initial lessons from my kind of quick journey through into landscape architecture so far. So that's where I'm at.
Thanks, Kymberly. If you do want to go to dental school, just know that they also talk about topography.
Oh, I know. Yes. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between dentistry and landscape, I feel like. So it's kind of not a crazy coincidence that I ended up here, but yeah, might end up going back.
Thank you for sharing your story. So next we have Diana Fernandez, and Diana is the Deputy Director of the Boston Redevelopment Authority. We were all very excited when you got this job because we were like, yay, a landscape architect is in there now. So I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit.
Thank you so much. Super inspired, Kim, by your presentation. I think I think I went a little off script here, but you're all gonna have to bear with me. So, when I was asked this question, about how I found this profession and what it means to me, and I didn't know what it was like to enter. Oh, can you hear me?
I think you froze for a little
And I
bit.
think you froze for a second, yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry. So the reason I'm showing you this image of our planet is because a lot of the conversations I had with my daughter, our place in the universe and what makes us so special. And one of the things that's been so impactful in my life is understanding this sort of endless cycle of change, of difference, of entropy, of all these things coming together to shape where we are. And it's so much about
Something
my
is happening,
homeland.
Diana, something is
So,
happening with your audio. Something is happening with your audio.
me, my relationship to landscape architecture is a really personal one. It was about
Diana, something is happening with your audio. So we can't hear
Oh,
you.
no.
Do you, is your
Let's see,
internet
sorry.
suffering?
Can you all hear me?
We can, or I can, but we can't see your slides, which we do also
Okay.
want to see. So I wonder, do you want us to go to the next person or do we want to try again?
Okay, I'll try again. Can you all hear me?
Yes, clear now.
Okay.
Yes, clearly.
Sorry. So I'm not sure what you got from the beginning, but I'm just going to go through these quickly. I started off, thinking about landscape architecture really as a lot of the thoughtful conversations I was having with my daughter, who was always really curious at a young age about our place in the universe and what it means to think about, this special little blue marble that we call home, and what it takes to have inherited this place, and what it means to inhabit it with a bunch of other really wonderful people. And for me, this is a really personal experience as it relates to where I grew up, which, is the Dominican Republic. It's this island in the Caribbean. And for me, home and landscape and architecture and urban design were all sort of intrinsically connected. I grew up in a village where we didn't have running water, electricity, and this landscape was so essential to my survival and the survival of my family. And also we didn't have architects, we didn't have engineers. What you saw here, this place where we hung out as a neighborhood underneath our mango tree, that came out of community. And it really inspired me in so many ways as I immigrated to the United States. And one of the things that was most critical, I think, in finding my place into landscape architecture is that when I first found out about it, I was actually pursuing an architecture degree. And I found architecture to be so hostile to lived experience and to the way in which I wanted to think about what it meant to live in a city or in a village, and that intersection between nature and the built environment. And I was taking an urban planning course when one of the senior scholars there was like, "Oh, have you heard about landscape architecture?" And that just transformed the trajectory of my career. And I just fell in love with this profession, and the ability for it to transcend all these scales and to really bring forward what it means to live on this planet in harmony with our natural environment. So that led me to a really wonderful career in private practice. I was practicing in Philadelphia and then ended up here in Boston at Sasaki. I was luckily hired by Gina at Ford at the time, who brought me over, and it, was a really enlightening experience for me to work across all these scales. And to also try to find myself. I think I had spent a lot of my early career in private practice focused on, I guess, assimilating in a way with the way the profession operated. And it was really getting into the profession a little bit deeper and engaging with the Landscape Architecture Foundation through their Leadership and Innovation Fellowship that I found what I had always believed in, which was this notion that this blue little planet, this incredible profession, is defined by, heterogeneity. It's defined by diversity. It's this sort of opportunity for us to think about our world and our place in the world in a different way. And it's just been such an incredible opportunity for me to build that. And when I think about diversity and I think about landscape architecture, I always found myself saying, well, we're so good at talking about this from a biodiversity standpoint. We talk about the birds and the bees and all their great things that our plant palettes are going to do. But I often found myself asking, well, we're the people, how are we designing for the multitude of our society? And that's when I really stumbled upon these concepts and really thinking about at a systems level, how do you overlap the ecological and the natural systems with more of the social, cultural, and linguistic infrastructure, which is so important to the way in which society operates, and that all those layers are intrinsically connected, and that it's so important for us to think about those intersections as we think about our profession. And, this is incredibly important, especially as you think about our country and the change. And I think as a migrant, I was always questioning, where's my place in this country? How does this ideology, right, of America shape who I am? And it's just fascinating to think about this notion of America really being this ideology that continues to evolve and change over time. And it really led me to where I am today with the Boston Planning and Development Agency, and working very closely with Mayor Wu's administration, and having the opportunity to take all this passion and vision for this, vision of a heterogeneous future, a heterogeneous city, and apply it at a city scale. And we've been really lucky actually to be working with agency team. So thanks, Kim and Gina, for continuing to contribute to this wonderful work on the Boston design vision. And, this quote our mayor made, Michelle Wu made during State of the City really stuck with me, because I think we've gotten used to resiliency and talking about it, but what does it mean to think about changing the world we live in and imagining what that future can be? And it's really something that has really driven this work and where I am today. It's led to a ton of incredible engagement around the Boston Design Vision, and I welcome all of you to engage around this, and incredible insight on what does it mean to engage in a dialogue with the community around what is design excellence to you? What does home mean to you? What are those characteristics, and how can we be more thoughtful about that as we shape our city's fabric? We have a ton of incredible people that serve in this effort, and these are just some of the folks that are participating. And I welcome all of you to also come out. We're doing really fun shindig at City Hall Plaza, where we're kind of showcasing a ton of the work that we've done around this. And I don't say this lightly, but this work is my life's work. It's a true reflection of my heart and my values and what I believe in for our society. And I'm just so incredibly excited to share that with you. And if there's one thing I will tell you all is that if I look back and think about my younger self, I would tell my younger self to believe in what I thought from day one, which was like, I love color, I love expression, I want to be loud in public spaces, and to have that actually really define my practice rather than trying to make it quiet or somber or just the plants, tone it down. So I wish someone had told me to believe in myself from day one. I probably would have spent more of my career living that example and inspiring the people you work with and the communities we serve to see themselves in our profession. And then as a point of reflection too, I think mentors are so critical, and I'm so glad that you brought that up in the beginning. But I would also say sponsors are so incredibly important as well. I think I really benefited from having folks that were willing to go up to bat for me, to ask for all the money, to ask for all the resources, to live a balanced life with my family and my career. And I'm just incredibly thankful for that because it's allowed me to be where I am. And then the last thing I will say is that I think, especially for women and women of color in this profession, it's so easy to think that you aren't qualified for these jobs. I certainly felt that way when I got called to consider this position at the city of Boston. And I think I'm so thankful to have had mentors around me who said, you are more than qualified. You embody what this position could be. And that really gave me the wind to push ahead and to take on a really challenging job and to expand myself in ways I hadn't imagined before. So really finding those people that can be in your camp is really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. That was great. So next up we have Nigel, and Nigel is at Brown, Richardson, and Rowe.
Okay, hello everyone. As you just heard, I'm Nigel Cummings, and I'm really excited to be here and to share my journey with you all. And it's been great to hear what everyone else has been talking about so far. So let me get started and let me share my screen. If I can find it. Okay. So, okay. So, I'm just going to repeat that again. My name is Nigel Cummings. I'm very excited to share my journey with you all. So I take the idea of journeys as a way to inspect myself and my background and to share my journey with all of you. I take the idea of journeys as a way to inspect myself and my background and to show my younger self and those who need to hear it that there is no one way to get something done. Being completely true to and figuring yourself out by taking the less direct path is a valid, and at least to me, a necessary aspect of personal and professional growth. That uncertainty and lack of being completely sure should not be seen as a source of stress or discomfort. We should instead embrace these feelings and view them as motivation and a sense of pride and individuality. So here I present my path to what has now been 2 years as a landscape designer at Brown, Richardson, Rowe. So I grew up just outside of New York City, in New York. I grew up in New York. I never really had anyone like me around. A very long time ago, but in high school, I was one of 12 Black students out of an entire 7 to 12 of 980.
Oh
So
my
like I've
wow.
yeah. So like I've always just been like I've never really had anyone like me around, and
Oh my God.
you know, like I sort of viewed that. I don't know. You can view it as sort of like a bad thing, and obviously it's not the best. It would have been good to have grown up with people who looked like me, to have professors and teachers who looked like me and who understood what it was like to grow up being Black in America. But that wasn't really the case. But you know, instead of letting that take me down, I instead sort of viewed that as, you know, I don't have anyone to compare myself to, and that's not a bad thing. You know, I can be completely myself. I can shape myself in whatever way, and no one's going to be like, but you know, look at him and look at her. You know, what are they doing? And I'm like, I don't care about what they're doing. I just want to do what I'm doing. You know, it's exciting that way. So growing up, I was fascinated with creating and looking into how people interact with spaces and places. As like, okay, growing up, I was fascinated with creating and looking into how people interact with the spaces and places they come across throughout their lives. I remember like being in the backyard in the garden at my parents' house and like just being in the dirt, and you know, was not the good child. I feel like I probably messed up the walls and all of that. I was always, you know, going around playing with like crayons and melting wax and trying to figure out, you know, what would happen when you take something and you mess with it and it creates something different. So I always was just inspired or really interested in sort of material exploration and experimenting and just doing things that no one else is really doing because it's exciting. So I took this interest with me when I left high school, and I went on to study architecture at the Rhode Island School of Design. And at this time, I knew that I was curious about how people engage with their built environment. I was really curious about light. I was curious about time and memory and the ephemeral and all those, the atmospheric. I love all of that. It's just fascinating. And I felt like architecture sort of let me explore that. But there was something missing, and I think Diana sort of mentioned it. It's there's something very hard, very harsh, very not user-friendly about architecture. I just remember being in school, and it was like, you know, everyone was just trying to outdo each other constantly. There's no real camaraderie. It was just, I have to be better than everyone else. You know, architecture, it's not, you know, it's not like a group activity. It's, I'm the architect and I know what's best, and everyone has to, you know, you all know. It was kind of a very, I don't know, it was an interesting experience, and I appreciate it. I love my time at RISD, but after some time in architecture, I was like, this doesn't feel right. And so I took some time off and I found this internship at this place called Caluyala in Panama in 2016. I found it 2 weeks later. I applied, and then a week after that, they were like, "Okay, you start in a week." So I had to get all my vaccines. I had to get all my supplies. I had to get everything in like 3 weeks. But 3 weeks later, I was in Panama, and it was incredible. I had this design thinking internship where we were just living out in nature, like off the grid, nothing. There was no running water, there was no electricity, but we were just there living in and living with the landscape. And it you know, fed us, it housed us, well, it's incredible. It's nature, it's the landscape. It gives us life. It's beautiful. So when I was in Panama at this internship, I had many opportunities to sort of question everything. That's you know, that's very important to me. You have to question everything. You have to question how things have been done, and how you can do them and how you can do them better, because there's always a way to make things better. So being in this place, this unfamiliar place, I sort of had to, I guess, sort of come outside of myself. I had to just I just had to, can't think of the word right now, but I had to embrace the spontaneity, and that's sort of something that's like deeply important to me now. That's one of the most important things in my life, and I would say to my younger self, that's what you got to do. You got to just, you know, the program starts in 2 weeks down in Panama. You got to apply, and you'll figure it out. But yeah, so during my time there, I sort of, I learned through experimentation on how to develop spaces that fostered a deeper connection to our natural community. And so after 3 months living there, I returned and realized that architecture wasn't really for me. And so I made the decision to leave RISD and continue my undergraduate studies elsewhere. I went on to get my bachelor's of urban studies and planning and a minor in art because I love art, and I went to art school. Had to continue it. And in my urban studies program, it was there that I discovered environmental psychology and spatial equity and environmental justice. Like, I mean, I guess I've always known that they sort of existed, but I was able to really delve into them, and I was just fascinated. I don't know if that's the right word. I was kind of fascinated by the inequity and the inequality of spaces of our society, of the world. Oh well. Maybe I shouldn't say oh well, but it kind of made me want to do something about it. And so I graduated in 2018. And then it was there, I think it was maybe my last month, that one of my advisors had asked me if I'd ever heard of landscape architecture, and I hadn't. And so I sort of looked into it, and I was like, wow, this combines everything that I'm interested in. And so I applied to a bunch of graduate programs, like all around the country and Canada. I was like, just pick me. And I ended up at UMass Amherst, and so I was there from 2018 to 2021, and it was incredible. So it was an incredible opportunity where I was able to work alongside some incredible minds while continuing to explore my interests and continuing to create. And sort of on that topic of mentors, when I was at UMass, I found this professor. Her name is Carolina Aragon, and she was my master's advisor. I did a bunch of, I had the opportunity, I was lucky enough to be able to work with her and a bunch of other undergraduate and graduate students to sort of work to sort of combine all of my interests. You've got spatial equity, you've got art, you've got design, you've got installation, and a lot more. Everything I've spoken about in the past. Basically, all of her projects sort of combined all of those. And I was like, wow, I had no idea that you could do art in the landscape and have it actually be meaningful. So during my time at UMass Amherst, I worked on, I believe, 4 public art projects with Carolina and the group. These are just two of the 4 that I worked on, and it was just incredible. I discovered, it was sort of a combination of all of the things I'd studied: architecture, art, urban studies, urban planning, landscape architecture, all of that. And it was just so much fun. Anyway, having gone to art school and spending most of my time engaged in the process of creative thinking and design exploration, it was just incredible to be able to work with Carolina. And so sort of moving forward, I was able to bring that to my master's project, where she was Carolina was my master's chair. And she sort of, and I'm very lucky that she sort of embraced my sort of wacky, sort of out there sort of way of being a student, and also like just being a person, being a creative, being a designer, being an artist, all of those things. She embraced my awkwardness and all of that, and she really helped me discover a love for landscape architecture, for public spaces, for just the fact that we have this ability to, as designers, we have the opportunity to shape public spaces, to shape experiences, to shape memories, and it's so beautiful and fascinating. So that was my master's project, sort of a combination of all of those. And so after I graduated at UMass, I applied to a bunch of jobs, and I have been working now for the past 2 years as a landscape designer at Brown, Richardson, and Rowe in Boston. It's been a great experience. I love what I do every single day. We work for the public, and it feels good to work for the public because landscape, it's a public thing. It shouldn't belong to anyone. It's the earth, it's the environment, it's it shouldn't be owned by anyone. And so I just love what I do. I think that, the things that I would tell myself as a very, very all over the place younger Nigel, definitely you have to embrace spontaneity. You cannot never change yourself to match anyone else. You have to stay true to yourself no matter what. Who cares about what other people are doing? Who cares about what you're expected to do? That's the most exciting paths to me are the ones that diverge and you go do something else. It's all about just getting out there and exploring. I'd say, embrace the unexpected, embrace the unknown, have that curiosity, and just never doubt yourself. I doubted myself a lot in the past, and I'm like, there's no reason to do that, I guess. It's been a great experience. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what the next couple of years bring. But yeah, so that's pretty much my experience so far in the field. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it all. I'm really happy that I was able to find something that combines all of my passions, all of my interests. And yeah, I'm happy to be here with all of you and to share my journey. So that's that.
Thank you, Nigel. So next up, we have Isabella. And Isabella Frontado is also at Boston Planning and Redevelopment Agency. And Isabella, we are excited to hear about how you got here.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to join the conversation tonight. So as Lisa said, I'm an urban designer for Boston Planning and Redevelopment Agency, and I work closely with Diana. And so I'm going to share a little bit of my path tonight. Hold on just one second. Let me just share my screen. All right. Can everyone see that? Okay. So growing up, my dad would recite this Antonio Machado poem called Caminante no hay camino. And it's a poem that I think about a lot still. So this section in bold is what the part that crops up in my mind most when I think about my trajectory as a designer. And it's, there is no road, you make your own path as you walk. It's what it translates to. So like everyone demonstrated tonight, the journey to landscape architecture is not always a straightforward path. And even once you've found landscape architecture, we're going to continue to create our own paths within it. And it's amazing that when you look back at the road that you came down, everything comes together and it looks really clear cut. But then you realize that there was so much kind of clearing and regrowth that really did happen in the process. And for all of that to kind of unfold. So tonight I have a few little diagrams that are going to guide us through. It's more like an abstract journey through kind of how I found landscape architecture and all of this. So, and some of the questions that followed up. So I'm going to give a little bit of context for how I became interested in the built environment, because context is a large part of why I'm a designer today. And so I'm Venezuelan American. I was born in Boston while my parents were both completing their studies here. My mother's American and my father's from Venezuela. And when I was a year old, we moved back to Venezuela, and I lived there until I was about 5 years old. And then between yearly visits, moved back to Venezuela to visit my extended family. I was raised speaking Spanish and cooking Venezuelan food and listening to Latin music, and very much entrenched in both the Venezuelan and American culture and politics. And I think Venezuela is the place where I fell in love with all of the complex possibilities of what landscape architecture began to unpack for me. And every year we would go back to Venezuela to visit family. We would arrive in Caracas and spend a few days visiting cousins and other relatives, and then make the kind of 10 to 12 hour drive to this town called Carúpano, which is a small city along the eastern coast of Venezuela, where my grandmother and other extended family lived. And over the course of the journey from Caracas to Carúpano, along kind of a mostly 2-lane highway, we would pass through an extraordinarily varied landscape. It was a mix of lush mountains, tropical jungle, expansive savanna, red clay desert, and even radiant Caribbean Sea. And I think I had the incredible opportunity to watch kind of, as over the years with each trip, the landscape and the cities and the villages along the trajectory morphed, growing and shrinking against the backdrop of a rather seismic social, political, and economic shift in the country. And it was at the scale of the kind of year-to-year changes along this trajectory that I started to understand how the shape of our cities and landscapes changed over time in reference to very complex social, political, and even economic pressures in our world. But again, I was a teenager at the time, and I couldn't quite fathom that this was all by design. And so in college, I thought that I could find answers, like so many of us have tonight, to some of the questions that I had around space, art, and politics in architecture. And I studied architecture at Wellesley College, where the Bachelor's of Arts in Architecture program was kind of a mix of art, history, and science. And I found incredible mentorship in my studio art professor, Daniela Rivera, and also Andy Mowbray. And they both helped my creativity flourish in a way that I really could never have imagined. And so through this studio art and art history courses, I was able to dive into the social history of art and architecture, and piecing together how the social, the political, and even the economic and scientific transformations shape and inscribe themselves in the physical artifacts of our world. But I think it wasn't really until I studied abroad in Denmark that I learned about Jan Gehl's urban design and planning work, which was so focused on creating a research and design methodology that produced cities for people. And these ideas stood in really stark contrast to the modernist ideals that I was learning about in my architecture and history courses, like so many of you have expressed tonight, where the architects were so focused on these kind of abstract ideas of beauty and materiality that they had forgotten about. And they had forgotten kind of in the process about humans inhabiting a lot of these structures. And so it wasn't until my senior year of college in Whiston Spurn's MIT course, The Once and Future City, that I began to understand what landscape architecture was and how its ideas and methods shape our lives and our urban environments. So when I graduated from Wellesley, I knew that kind of my interests were somewhere between architecture and planning. I loved designing, drawing, and building things with my hands. And this was something that architecture offered, but I was more interested kind of in the complex web of life that was happening outside of the buildings. And I really wanted to understand how I could help to shape that world. And so at Wellesley, during an architecture alumni panel, I remember meeting Gina Ford, who's, I think she's here, for the first time. And she described the expansive nature kind of her work as a landscape architect. And I started to kind of finally understand that maybe this was a path for me. And so after graduating from Wellesley, I interned for a year at Sasaki, where as an urban design and planning intern, I actually sat behind Diana. And it was through the breadth of projects at Sasaki and the many conversations that I had with Diana, with Gina, with Alexa Toteba, and with even Nina Chase, that I confirmed that landscape architecture was the right scale for me to be thinking about. I would kind of, in landscape architecture, I'd be able to hone in on design while still kind of thinking about thinking at the larger scale of interconnected systems. And so the following fall, I started at Harvard Graduate School of Design and Landscape Architecture in their MLA1 program. And I really loved the challenge and the rigor and the energy and the people that I met in grad school. And it was through kind of both the MLA and the MDes programs that I was able to actively pursue ways that we, a collective we of people and designers, kind of shape our environment in reference to kind of these social, political, and economic systems that I had kind of always been curious about. And so much of what I created in grad school and beyond was the result of long nights and hard work, but also came from the support and the mentorship of an incredible group of people that I really would not have been able to do all of these things without. So family, fellow students, and faculty, they all asked kind of very insightful questions that pushed me to do things that I might never have done. And I think I'll never forget when one of my friends, Isabella and Danica, who are both here tonight too, they forwarded me an email in which a team at the GSD was soliciting applications for Platform 12 editor positions. And I remember Isabella messaging me and saying, hey, you might be good at this. And then a few weeks later, he followed up and sent a reminder email, which I found today as I was looking, that just said, gentle reminder with a little winky face. And kind of creating and editing Platform 12 was one of the most kind of formative experiences for me at the GSD, because it helped me to understand how our education was shaping us as designers, and in turn kind of shaping the design of our world as we were kind of graduating and coming out into field of practice. And so kind of as I was reflecting on the different moments of transition, kind of from college to the work environment to graduate school, and even back to work, I think a lot about the importance of finding, as all of us have mentioned tonight, amazing mentors at each stage of the process. And these mentors helped me to kind of continue to grow into the designer and practitioner that I am today. And I think that they're mentors who don't think that there is a kind of set bar, but they kind of, one of the things that pulls them all together is that they have a vision of growth, and growth that they expect both of themselves and they expect of others. And they're people who provide mentorship in comments kind of like, oh, did you see kind of that event or that lecture or that article? Take a look. Or they might say, you might be really good at this, give it a try. Or even give this a stab and see how it goes, and we can talk about it together. And kind of these mentors have been critical and constructive in very productive ways for me. And in their leadership, they've demonstrated humility and a pursuit to learn and grow kind of without demeaning themselves or others around them in the process. And I'm really grateful for kind of the many different mentors and experiences that I've had along the way. And so kind of in finishing kind of after nearly 2 years of like private design practice, and getting into the very fine details of paving patterns and planting layouts and construction details. I'm grateful that earlier this year I transitioned to public practice at the BPDA, working with Diana and tackle some of the most pressing design questions that we have, and that she outlined for kind of like how it is that we design an equitable, resilient, and affordable city. And so these are some of my reflections tonight, and I'm really excited to kind of have a more extensive conversation with all of you. So, thank you.
That was great, Isabella. Thank you. So it's 8 o'clock and I do want to be respectful of the time. So I am hoping that we can spend the next 10 or 15 minutes with you asking questions or contributing your own reflections. So I'm going to open up the floor. I think there is do you have to raise your hand, Gretchen? How do people speak?
This is just a Zoom meeting, so
Oh, you can unmute yourself
you
and
can unmute yourself.
sing.
So you can do that, or raise your hand, or put a question in the chat, whichever you're comfortable with.
Does no one have a question or a comment? I will ask a question of the 4 panelists. A number of you brought up this idea about having to feel like you have to tone it down or kind of not be as vibrant. I'm wondering, well, first, if that is in fact something that you all felt, and then secondly, if there is a way to kind of, have you found a way to get beyond that? Or, I think landscape architecture sometimes can be, especially when you're working in a firm, there's a way that people want things done that sometimes isn't your own, you do have to tone it down. So I'm wondering if anyone has had experiences with that, or just kind of having to tone down your background, yourself, etc.
I love that question, Louisa, and I can jump in here. I definitely experienced that even when I was in college. I remember I'm from the Caribbean, right? So we had engineering class and we were doing grading, and I loved grading. And I pulled out every color pencil I had to do that grading plan. And I remember my professors came by and they're like, "What have you done? This is not what you're supposed to do. The contours are red, and they're black when they're like, existing conditions." So it was just this moment where I was just like, well, that's how I'm visualizing it. And then I made another error the next time where I made a rendering and I did it in fall colors because I just loved red and orange. So it's just like, reminded me of home. And I remember, I think it was my professor at the time, I was like all over. She's like, "What? Where's their green?" And I just, I think it was, at the time it felt really hard because I was like, but this is who I am, they're like, no, that's not how you do it. And it just took a lot of years to figure out that I actually had the ability to do that because I was trained into that. And then you go into private practice and it's like, there's a way in which you learn how to do things, that sort of apprenticeship process. And what I've been trying to do, even with the staff that we, are hiring new into the agency or that I've worked with at Sasaki, is to say, I don't believe in any of that. I want you to show me what you are, and to bring all of yourself to this work. Because honestly, that's when we deliver the best stuff. If it's just a sounding room where everybody's feeling the same and telling you the same thing, you're not innovating. You're not actually thinking of other ways in which people are experiencing the world or moving through the world in a different way. And I just found it to be like the most valuable design tool is to make room for that, to make room for people to blossom into who they are and how that can express itself in a design medium. So, but it's hard, you know, there's moments where you got to pull it in and you have to think about how to be strategic, but I don't give up, you know, and I think it's one of those things where when you speak truth and you're speaking from a place of truth, and I think people hear that, and especially the people we serve, whether as a resident or, you know, you as me as in the private sector working for a private client, they hear that truth. And sometimes they can take it in and sometimes they don't. But I just have found it to be so impactful to my career when I finally stepped into that.
So, hey, Diana, thank you so much for your sharing your experience tonight. I just want to say right on, I totally agree. As another Caribbean Latino, I have been in so many places, in so many situations where people have always said, wow, you're like the wild and crazy Cuban, and you're like the Latino. And it's like, and it was always like, yeah, that's kind of backhanded racism. And it was unwelcome. Now I embrace it. Now I'm like, you know, FYI, just too bad. Sorry. But I totally agree about like, because like, let's face it, landscape architecture was a WASPO white profession. And many of our practices are still in that realm of like working in a white, wealthy environment. And so like, what do you do with that kind of stuff? But that also kind of trickles down, and this is another point, when one is dealing with like things like well-meaning conservation commissions from white places of the state. And so you're the Latino, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, these people are so white. And like, what do you do with their whiteness? You want to say, are you people for real? You know, we're trying to do something that's going to help the community, a poor community, and they're worried about like some minutia about whether you're cutting down a tree or not. And it is like maddening. It is maddening that we're still kind of entrenched in a very white profession and a white thing. And I think change is hard. And I think it happens. I think of Claude Cormier, who passed away a couple of weeks ago, who was an amazing practitioner from Montreal. And like, he embraced it, like he embraced that. But I think that we come from a tradition. I know at Sasaki, I interviewed at Sasaki like maybe 30 years ago. And I was told, no, Ricardo, it's kind of corporate. I don't think that might be the place for you. And this is from a friend of mine. And so I'm glad I never went to Sasaki. No offense to the Sasakyites here. But, you know, it's fascinating to think about. Like, wow, this is really kind of, we're still in it, boys and girls. And we still got to fight. So that's what I would say.
There are a couple of questions here in the chat that I want to get to. Gina asked, since panel members come from places afar, for small business owners trying to make Boston more welcoming and inclusive of talent, what can we do to make this city more of a home to the next generation? That's a great question. So I think Gina is partially saying, like, how can we make everyone feel more welcome and feel like you want to be here in Boston? And this is really open to anyone who has a great idea, because I think a lot of people want to do that.
I guess I've been thinking about this question in terms of comparing different neighborhoods within Boston and trying to understand kind of what the different character is of each place. And I think, like, when I look at friendliness levels of different neighborhoods, I like look to JP, I think, as one of the kind of most friendly, or maybe like highly programmed kind of neighborhoods where community in a way is like embedded into some of the social fabric or some of the urban fabric of the neighborhood. And so I don't know if kind of creating more opportunities and more spaces for gathering for all of these different collections of people to take place is kind of one of the priorities within this, in terms of making Boston more kind of welcoming, so that people can get out of their apartments and can find their community and can find kind of different events kind of within the public that will kind of bring them, unite them in a way that maybe in this 21st century digital age we've forgotten how to do. So that's something that I will offer as a possibility.
We have another question from Ben. Many of you spoke about strong childhood memories of formative landscapes. It made me wonder what kind of conversations you have with your parents, family, and friends about the landscape architecture profession. Have these conversations influenced your practice?
I love this question because I'm here at home with my parents, and my mom and I put together this slide presentation tonight. So her and I like had a moment where we were crying when we were looking at old family photos to put on that slide that had some of the photos from my childhood. So, but I would say, especially with my mom, like I've had a lot of conversations with her over the years, like being in school and being in practice, where initially, like most of my family, like what is landscape architecture? Like it's gardening, like it's being, cutting grass or just like working outside. But I feel like for her, I've like been able to see her perception of landscape architecture evolve the most, to the point where like she will point out things to me that she notices about the built environment that she's learned from having conversations with me about our projects and things that I've learned over the years. So I feel like my relationship with her is really special in that way. And I get a lot of inspiration from her, even though she doesn't come from a design background. I feel like her perspective as an outsider to the profession, who is just learning about landscape through my perspective, has been really inspiring, and it's helped me like understand, like within my own work, how to translate things in a way that feels legible for people like her, or people who don't come from a design background, in a way that that really resonates with people from that perspective. So yeah, that's been my experience.
I love that, Kim. I also feel like it's something we've struggled with too. I think now, being on the public sector side, I remember we were putting together our web page to talk about some of the work we were doing, and our communications team came over and they pulled me aside and they're like, Diana, your urban design page is at a master's or a PhD reading level. And I was like, what? Like, do you understand that normal people can't understand what you're saying? And it was just a real moment where you have to be so thoughtful about how is it that you make it accessible. And I think we're inherently trained to speak in this like code language because that makes us feel special, and validates our work because it's so exclusive. But that comes at a price, because a lot of people don't know what it is that we do. And it's been really helpful to be in this space and to try to figure out, how do we talk about this? And when even talking to the public about what landscape architecture is, I'm like, it's everything in between the buildings. Just imagine all of it. And just trying to think big picture. So, it's a real challenge, and it's really hard. It's hard even for me that really wants to do that, to figure out, how do you make that language accessible, and how do you ensure that you're not yourself, even in the way you speak, are excluding people, right, with that very language.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, Diana, that's the way that you describe it to people is exactly the same way I describe it. When people ask me, I'm like, it's everything outside of the buildings, everything around the buildings. But yeah, that sort of conversation on the sort of exclusivity of it all. Like I remember doing public art projects and having in grad school, and like I really like to write. I like we were talking about. I like to write that way, and sort of having professors and knowing that people who can't they can't necessarily understand what you're talking about, and you have to sort of you have to be more inclusive, with your language and how you talk about the profession. Um, my father really likes to garden, so like he knows what landscape architecture is, but I think he's the only person that does. So I've sort of had some conversations with him about it, but that's my.
So just remember, every time someone makes a silly comment about landscape architecture, it's your opportunity to tell them exactly what it is without using jargon.
I think that communication question though is really interesting and really important too, because I mean it's communicating the profession and kind of all the different values that are kind of embedded in the profession in different ways to different audiences. I think one of the things that I'm working on at the BPDA is a story for the Boston Public School System. It's a series of illustrations for how the city works, and it's for a pre-K audience. And so it's kind of communicating a lot of these questions through drawing, these ideas of landscape, of urban systems, of kind of all of these different interweavings of urban fabric to a really young audience, kind of in the hope that they will be able to take that with them in the future as they think about the city, as they think about the built environment. And so it's kind of affecting from very small children until hopefully they're adults, kind of their perspective of the built world in some way. So those questions of communication from your parents to small children.
I would also add for those in the public sector that public meetings are not, they are public, but they're not necessarily equitable or representative of the public that we serve, because frequently it is the same people who come to all of these meetings and pound on the desk because they feel the agency to be able to do so, because they have the voice. So yeah, it's very, all of this communication stuff is very interesting. We have another couple of questions. One is the most difficult challenge you've had to overcome to be where
I can get this one started. I would say I think the hardest challenge for me, there's been a lot of them, but I'm going to share a more recent one. I think, when I have 3 children, and I had just delivered my son May 2nd of last year. When I got an email in my inbox, I was like, hey, are you interested in applying to a job with the city? And that was a really hard decision, because it meant that I had to walk away from a beautiful home we worked really hard to restore, a life we had built, a firm and a career I had been building, to take a chance on something new. And to be honest, if I had known how hard it was going to be, I probably would have said no, right? But I took the chance, and I had such an incredible sort of support system behind me. And even with that support system in that village, I have to tell you, it was one of the hardest things I've done. This past year was one of the hardest years of my life. And like on a personal level, on a professional level, it's I think oftentimes we just see the good stuff, and we see like people succeeding, and oh, it's so great you got this position, but people don't see how much you sacrifice to get there. And I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of wisdom to navigate that and come out of it okay. So I just, I think they come at different stages in your life, and sometimes it's a hurricane and it's everything at once, and sometimes they're discrete moments. But I just want to give people a little bit of empathy, right? Even when you're at quote unquote the top, it takes a lot of sacrifice to get there. But it doesn't mean that it's not worth it. I'm certainly like a stronger person for all of it, but it's a lot.
I wouldn't say that I've necessarily overcome this fully yet, but I think the biggest struggle that I've had is like trusting myself and my own abilities. Like I think maybe everyone in this room deals with imposter syndrome to some degree and has at some point in their professional or academic career. And I don't exactly know where it came from, because I feel like I have felt supported in pretty much every stage of my career, which I've been very fortunate to. But I don't know, I was trying to reflect on it as I was thinking about this question. And I think like to Diana's anecdote earlier about like drawing in color and kind of being forced to draw a specific way, because that was the way it's supposed to be. Like, I think that was kind of my experience going from undergrad to grad school at the GSD. Like when I was an undergrad, I drew in color. I thought about places for people, and it was just like a much more vibrant pedagogy at Ohio State. But then when I went into the GSD, starting with core 3, it was just like all of that was kind of ripped away, and like we're only designing for plants and animals and not thinking about people, and kind of retreating from the urban environment. And so it was an interesting switch in the way of thinking, and also like drawing in black and white and like trying to think of how to like translate these like new esoteric ideas in my mind was a real challenge. And I think that was kind of where I started to like lose trust in myself and what I thought I already knew about landscape architecture. And so there's been a kind of a lot of unlearning that I've had to do over the years. And I'm always like, Gina and Bree know this, and all the other agency people that are on the call know that I'm always like prefacing my work with like, this is hideous, or like, this is like a quick pass, but like, here's what I did. I always feel like I need to like set the bar low for myself, or like undermine myself before I like present my work, but there's no reason to do that. And I think, being at agency, like one of the first things that I learned being here was about like not apologizing all the time, or apologizing less, or saying like, thanks for bearing with me instead. And that's something I think I've gotten better at. I still am like working on, but I think that's like an eternal struggle as a young woman in this profession sometimes. But yeah.
I think that also falls on people who are leading younger employees to kind of encourage them and make them see that most often they're the person in the room who knows the most about it. So you don't have to apologize. We have one final question because it is about to be 8:30. And Danica says, thank you for all the presentations. Many of you reflected on who helped you along the way, and I'd love to hear, how do you pay it forward by mentoring others trying to follow in your footsteps?
I think one of the things that has been really important that as I've reflected on kind of where it is that you find mentorship, it's kind of in these smaller everyday interactions, and figuring out ways of like picking up on small details of things that people might be interested in, and trying to kind of circle back if I see something that reminds me of that particular interest. And those are just like very small ways of kind of saying, hey, I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about this thing that you're interested in. And I think that maybe you could think about this other thing that like maybe could help to extend your vision of that interest. And then the other thing is also just like very simply like getting coffee with people. I think that was one of the things that it's like a small part of your time to put away, but it's also very easy. And so those kinds of things, because sometimes it's harder kind of within more structured systems of mentorship, even though it's really important to structure the mentorship, to kind of keep that flowing. And so these are kind of smaller ways that I've been able to think about that.
Yeah, I'd say, well, one, I'm one of the co-chairs on the Emerging Professionals Committee for the BSLA. So I'm sort of using that as a way to sort of open myself and engage myself further with the community, and sort of getting to know students and other people who are just starting out in the field. You know, sorry, just lost my train of thought. But yeah, so like I'm using that, talking to my coworkers who are also, you know, closer to my age, about how they got here, how they're doing, all of that. It's really great. But I think being in the Emerging Professionals Committee, I want to sort of use that as a way to sort of, I guess, sort of being part of that committee, it gives you the opportunity to act as a mentor to a lot of people. And so that's why I'm doing that.
I would say too that, like, I think a way to pay it forward is to take a chance on people. I think oftentimes people just need somebody to believe in them and to say, like, kind of throw them in, you know, or open up the door. So I do think that I've been really fortunate to benefit from that, and I try to do that as much as I can in these spaces, whether, you know, you're being asked to speak somewhere or you're being offered a job and say, actually, no, but I think this is the right person. Or consider this person, or engage with this individual. So I do think that there are so many ways in which you can kind of pass it forward. And also think about even the littlest things. I love what Isabella said. I think even those moments of a no, it's like, I thought about you, or have you thought about, you know, doing this, or, hey, you should submit for an ASLA panel, go do that. You know, it's a good idea. Like, those things are always, can be really transformative in somebody's life. So I think opening those doors and making yourself available too. One thing I'll say too that I think forgot to mention is that, you know, seeking out the mentorship, I think all of us talked about it a little bit organically. Like, it just happened, you know, we found these people. But sometimes you kind of have to go get them. And I remember one of my longtime mentors, I literally just emailed. He was the president of the ASLA at the time. He was my professor of professional practice, but I hadn't talked to him in years. And I said, hey, Mark, I really want you to be my mentor because I want to be president of ASLA someday. And it was a random, like, cold email. He officiated my wedding like several years later. So all I have to say is, like, go get what you want. You know?
I think that is a great story to end on. And I think all of you guys have been so inspiring tonight. It's really nice to hear the different journeys. As I said, this is one in a series. I think we're going to have one or two more of these. And it's wonderful that so many people showed up, but I think more people need to show up, because more people need to hear that we are not all starting from the same place or coming from the same place or are the same. And that when we say there's a problem with diversity in this profession, there are reasons. And if you actually want to do something about it, then you need to listen to other people. So I really thank you guys, all of you, from the panelists to the people who are in attendance, for sharing your stories, for telling us about your journeys, and for being vulnerable. And I think it's really important to, when you see other people that you have a connection with, say to them, I feel you, I've been here. This is how I overcame it, and you too can overcome it, because so many people just need some encouragement and some mentorship. So yeah, I'm excited to see where these conversations go, and very hopeful. So thank you very, very much, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.